Have you ever felt invisible? Like no matter how hard you try, the world just looks right through you? This is the story of a woman who felt that way her whole life, and a little boy who was trapped in a gilded cage of silence. It's a story about how the most powerful language isn't spoken with words, but with a quiet heart. How a single moment of understanding can shatter the walls we build around ourselves. And how sometimes the person who's meant to clean the house ends up saving the family inside it. You know, I think we've all had moments where we feel unseen, where we're shouting into a silence so deep it feels like it might swallow us whole. This is a story about that silence, and about the incredible power of one person who was brave enough to step into it. Our story begins in a place that, from the outside, looked like a dream, the Valerius estate. Imagine it. Towering iron gates, manicured gardens that stretched for what seemed like miles, and a mansion built of pale stone that gleamed under the sun. It was a picture of perfect order, a place where everything had its place. But if you listen closely, past the whisper of the fountains and the rustle of the old oak trees, you could hear the quiet. Not a peaceful quiet, a heavy, waiting kind of quiet. And in the heart of that quiet was a young woman named Lena Petrova. Lena was new. She'd only been working at the estate for a few days, assigned to the routine cleaning of the East Wing. She moved through the grand marble-floored rooms like a ghost, her microfiber cloth wiping away invisible dust from priceless vases and polished tables. She was quiet, observant, and carried a weight in her eyes that suggested she knew more about hardship than she ever let on. This job was a lifeline for her. The money was better than the diner she'd worked at before, and every extra dollar was sent home to her grandmother to help with mounting medical bills. She kept her head down, did her work, and tried to be invisible. It was a skill she'd learned long ago. But on this particular morning, invisibility became impossible. It started as a sound, a faint, shrill cry that sliced through the mansion's stillness. It was coming from somewhere above. Lena froze mid-swipe, her cloth hovering over a window pane. Her heart gave a sudden, hard thump. It wasn't the cry of a child who was hungry or tired. No, this was different. This was a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. A cyclical, gasping sob that clawed its way out from the inside. It was a sound she knew, a sound that echoed from the deepest, most painful chambers of her own memory. You see, Lena had a brother. His name was Leo, and Leo was nonverbal and autistic. She remembered, with a clarity that could still bring tears to her eyes, finding him under their old kitchen table, his arms wrapped tightly around himself, rocking, hitting his head, his face a mass of frustration he could never, ever put into words. That was the sound Leo used to make, the sound of a soul trapped and screaming for a way out. Miss Petrova, the voice of the head housekeeper, Mrs. Green, floated up from the bottom of the staircase, sharp and warning. Stay clear of the upper wing. The 5th floor. It was an unspoken rule among the staff. You didn't go up there. It was treated as if it were cursed, a place of shadows and closed doors. But that cry, it was a magnet, pulling at something fundamental in Lena's soul. To ignore would be a betrayal of Leo, of her own past, of the very compassion that made her who she was. She didn't answer Mrs. Green. Instead, she started to climb. Her footsteps were silent on the plush carpet runner. The higher she went, the louder the crying became, each sob a little knife in her heart. At the end of a long, dimly lit hallway, a door was partially open. A flickering, bluish light pulsed from within, a sensory projector, casting shifting shapes on the walls. And there, in the middle of the room, was a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 7. He was curled into a tight ball on the floor, rocking back and forth with a violent rhythm, hitting his forehead against the solid leg of the bookshelf. Thump, 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 over and over. There was no one else in the room. No nanny, no parent. Just this small, terrified child, completely alone in his storm. Lena's breath caught. It was like looking into a terrible, heartbreaking mirror of her own childhood. Every instinct told her to rush in, to grab him, to hold him tight, and make it stop. But she knew, with a certainty born of painful experience, that would only make it worse. So she did something else. She stepped softly into the room and crouched down several feet away, making herself small, non-threatening. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost swallowed by cries. "I'm not going to touch you. Just sitting right here, okay?" The boy didn't look at her, but for a fraction of a second, his rocking slowed. Just a hitch in the rhythm, a tiny crack in the wall. She kept her hands in sight, palms open and up, and then, slowly, so slowly, she lifted one hand and traced a simple sign across her chest. It was a single word. Safe. It was a motion she hadn't used in years. One her grandmother had taught her, a lifetime ago, to use with Leo when the world became too much for him. A language without sound. The boy's head turned. Just a flicker of an eye in her direction. A momentary connection in a sea of chaos. And that's when the door was flung open. "What the hell are you doing in here?" The voice was like thunder, sharp enough to make Lena jump. She turned quickly. Standing in the doorway was Eris Thorne, the master of the estate, a man carved from marble and money, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her car. In one hand, he clutched his phone. The other gripped the doorknob like he wanted to wrench it from the wood. Lena stood up instinctively. "I'm sorry, sir. I heard him crying. I thought—" "And who gave you permission to be in this room?" he demanded, his gaze cutting from her to his son and back again, blazing with a fury that was laced with something else, fear. "No one, sir. I thought he might be in danger." "Step away from my son," he commanded. Her muscles stiffened, but she obeyed, moving carefully to the side. Eris strode into the room, his focus entirely on the boy. He bent down, his movement stiff and unfamiliar, and tried to lift his son. The result was instantaneous and explosive. The boy erupted. The quieting sobs turned into full-blown, ear-piercing screams. He kicked, he clawed, his small arms flailing wildly, fighting off his own father with primal terror. Eris struggled to hold him, his face a mask of shock and helplessness. "What's wrong with him?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Why does he do this?" And in that moment, Lena saw it. She saw past the expensive suit, past the anger, past the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. She saw a father, a terrified, heartbroken father, who had no idea how to reach his own child. "May I?" she asked again, her voice gentle but firm. This time, Eris didn't stop her. He was paralyzed by his son's reaction. Lena stepped forward and knelt. She didn't reach to take the boy from his father. She simply knelt there, present and calm, and the moment the child felt her presence, felt that quiet energy, the screaming eased. His panicked eyes found hers. He twisted out his father's grasp and collapsed into her arms as if his very bones had turned to water. His small hands gripped the fabric of her sleeve like it was a lifeline. He buried his face in her shoulder. And just like that, the storm was over. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier, more profound than the cry had ever been. Eris stared, utterly stunned. He looked from his son, now peaceful and clinging to the stranger, to Lena's calm face. "How?" he began, his voice stripped of its earlier thunder. "What did you do?" Lena looked up, still gently swaying with the boy in her arms. "I didn't do anything, sir," she said softly. "I just listened and signed." "Signed?" "A little. My brother, he's nonverbal autistic. This used to help him calm down when words failed." Eris's posture shifted. It was almost imperceptible, but Lena saw it. The rigid control he always carried seemed to soften at the edges. The suit that made him look so powerful now seemed to hang on him, too tight in all the wrong places. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Mina. Lena Petrova. I clean the East Wing." "You're not a therapist?" "No, sir. Just a cleaner." He watched her, just watched, as she held his son with a natural ease that he, the father, had never been able to manage. The boy, Elian, was completely still now, his breathing evening out into the rhythmic pattern of sleep. Aruz ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, leaving it slightly disheveled. He looked lost. He looked human. "Can you?" he started, then stopped, clearing his throat. "Can you stay a little longer today?" Lena looked down at the sleeping boy in her arms, at the trust he had placed in her so instantly, so completely. She felt the ghost of her brother Leo in the weight of his small body. She nodded. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I can stay." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the room in shades of orange and gold, Lena sat in the quiet nursery, a stranger holding a stranger's child. She didn't know it yet, but in that simple, quiet act of staying, she had just thrown a stone into the still waters of the Valerius estate. And the ripples would change everything. Have you ever watched the sunrise after a long, dark night? That first sliver of light doesn't erase the darkness all at once. It just promises that the night won't last forever. At the Valerius estate, after that first chaotic day, a sunrise was slowly beginning. But dawn is a fragile time, full of hope, yes, but also of uncertainty and shadows. When Lena returned to the estate the next morning, the heavy front door felt different. It wasn't just an entrance to a workplace anymore. It was a threshold into an unknown world. Her small duffel bag felt heavy on her shoulder, packed with a few changes of clothes, and the one thing that truly grounded her, a framed photo of her grandmother and her brother, Leo. Mrs. Green, the head housekeeper, showed her to a small, simple room in the staff wing. It was modest, but it was warm, with a window looking out over the back garden. "Mr. Thorne had this room prepared last night," Mrs. Green said, her voice a mix of curiosity and caution. "Said you were important." Lena shook her head gently. "I'm just here to help, Mrs. Green." The older woman gave a slight, knowing smile. "Maybe, but he doesn't give spare rooms to just anyone." By 8 a.m., Lena stood outside Elian's nursery, her heart beating in nervous rhythm. This time, it wasn't a cry that greeted her, but a profound silence. She pushed the door open to find him already awake, sitting on a plush rug, silently sorting colored blocks into 2 neat piles. He didn't look up as she entered. "Morning, Elian," she said softly, her voice a gentle intrusion into his world. He didn't respond, but he paused, just for a heartbeat. The sorting motion stopped. It was the smallest of acknowledgments, but to Lena, it felt like a victory. She didn't push. She simply walked in and sat cross-legged on the floor a few feet away, giving him his space. She was just a presence, a quiet, non-threatening island in his room. After a few long minutes, he nudged a red block toward her with his toe. A small, tentative smile touched Lena's lips. "Thanks," she whispered, and gently pushed the blue block back toward him. And just like that, a new language was born, not of words, but of colored blocks, of shared space, of patience. Hours melted away like that. There were no grand speeches, no forced interactions, just a quiet rhythm of presence. At one point, Lena began to hum, low and soft, an old gospel tune her grandmother used to sing. It was a sound from her own childhood, a sound of safety. Elian didn't protest. In fact, he leaned in slightly, the way a flower might lean toward sun. Unseen in the doorway, Eris Thorne watched. He wasn't in a suit today, just a simple button-down shirt. And he wasn't barking orders into his phone. He was just watching. His arms were crossed, but the usual tension in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a quiet, aching awe. He saw the way Lena sat, still and steady, not trying to force his son into a mold, but simply meeting him where he was. It made his chest ache in a way he didn't understand. It wasn't grief. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something that had been absent from this house for a very long time. Hope. Later that evening, as dusk painted the garden in shades of purple and blue, Lena found Eris standing by the nursery window, watching his son sleep. He was peaceful today, he said, his voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. No meltdowns. No hitting. Lena nodded, coming to stand a respectful distance away. He just needs to feel safe, Mr. Thorne. He needs to know he can lead and will follow. Eris turned from the window, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "I don't know what you're doing," he admitted, a rawness in his voice she hadn't heard before. "But it's working." "It's not a trick," Lena replied gently. "It's time. It's presence." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting back to Elian. He used to love trains, he said, the word seeming to escape him without permission. My wife, Ilara, she used to take him to the Railroad Museum every other Saturday. He swallowed hard. He hasn't asked to go since she passed. Not once. Lena didn't say anything. She didn't offer empty platitudes. She just let the silence hold the memory of the vibrant, laughing mother Elian had lost. She understood now that the silence in this house wasn't just Elian's. It was a shared silence, a grief that had settled into the very walls. I thought we were doing okay, Eris continued, his voice low and even, as if he were confessing a great sin. After the funeral, I hired the best therapist money could find. I enrolled him in every specialized program. I spared nothing. He turned to her, and his eyes were full of a helpless guilt. But it only got worse. The tantrums, the fear, the screaming. And now here you are, and he's calmer than I've seen him in over a year. Lena's heart broke for this man who had tried to solve a broken heart with checklists and bank balances. Grief isn't something you treat like the flu, Mr. Thorne, she said softly. It's not linear. Not for you. Not for him. Do you think he remembers her? Eris asked, the question hanging in the air like a prayer. Lena chose her words with care. I think he feels her absence. Even if he doesn't know how to say it, he feels the shape of the space she left behind. Eris sank into an armchair by the bookshelf, elbows on his knees, looking at his son with mixture of guilt and awe. I was married for 10 years, he said, the words flowing more freely now in the protective dimness of the room. We met in college. I was rigid. She was jazz. She laughed too loud, danced barefoot on our balcony in the rain, made breakfast at midnight. Mina smiled. She sounds wonderful. She was, he said, and something in his voice cracked just slightly. At that moment, Elian stirred in his sleep, and his eyes fluttered open. He looked across the room and, for a brief second, locked eyes with his father. Eris stood and approached his son slowly, his movements cautious. Hey, bud, he whispered, crouching down. How's it going? Elian didn't speak. He didn't react. But he didn't recoil. He didn't scream. He just looked. Eris glanced up at Lena, a question in his eyes. You think he'll ever talk again? He asked. Lena's gaze was warm and steady. I think he already is, Mr. Thorne. You just have to learn to listen to the version of the language he trusts. Eris held his son's gaze a moment longer, then nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. It was a beginning, a fragile, trembling beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. Later, as Lena prepared for bed in her new room, she looked at the photo of her grandmother and Leo. You'd like him, she whispered to the image of her brother. He's a mess, but he's trying. There was a knock at her door. It was Mrs. Green, holding a tray with a covered plate. Mr. Thorne said you haven't eaten since lunch. He insisted you get proper dinner. Lena accepted the tray, stunned. Thank you. Before she turned to go, Mrs. Green lingered. Don't get too comfortable, she warned, but her voice held no malice. Mr. Thorne changes moods like the wind. Lena nodded once. I don't expect anything. But as she closed the door and lifted the lid to reveal grilled salmon and roasted vegetables, she knew that was a lie. She was starting to expect something. She was starting to hope. And in a house that had been built on loss, hope was the most dangerous and the most beautiful thing of all. Down the hall, Eris Thorne sat alone in his study, a glass of scotch untouched on his desk. The file in front of him was Lena's employment application. He read the handwritten reference from her old manager at the diner. She's not fancy, but she shows up early, works late, and never complains. She's kind, and she knows how to listen, even when people don't know how to talk. Preston leaned back in his chair, the words echoing in the silent room. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. But inside, for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like a void. It felt like a blanket, like comfort. A new language was being learned in the Valerius estate, the language of colored blocks, of quiet humming, of shared silence. And with every passing hour, the walls around a little boy's heart and the walls around his father's began to grow just a little bit softer. There's a certain kind of peace that feels too good to last. It's like the world gives you a perfect, sunny day just so you can truly feel the bite of the storm when it finally arrives. In the Valerius estate, those fragile days of colored blocks and quiet hums of a father slowly learning to listen, they were the calm. And the calm was about to be shattered. It started with a sound that didn't belong. Not a child's cry, but a sharp, echoing knock on the grand front door. It was a kind of knock that wasn't asking for entry. It was demanding it. Lena was in the kitchen, slicing apples for Elian's afternoon snack. She felt a prickle of unease even before she saw the figures through the sidelight. There were 3 of them. A man in a tailored gray suit, holding a clipboard like a weapon. He was flanked by 2 others, their postures rigid and official. Eris reached the door first, his brow already furrowed. He opened it, his body blocking the entrance. "Can I help you?" The man in the suit offered a polite, bloodless smile. "Mr. Eris Thorne? I'm Marcus Fielding, from Child Welfare Services." He held up his badge. "We receive a report concerning the welfare of your son, Elijah Thorne. We're here to conduct an assessment." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Child Welfare Services. Lena's blood ran cold. She instinctively moved closer to Elian, who was playing with his trains on the kitchen floor, pulling him gently against her side. She could feel his little heart begin to pound against her, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Eris's voice was dangerously calm. "This is absurd. Who filed this report?" "I'm afraid that's confidential during the initial evaluation," Marcus replied, his tone unchanging. "May we come in?" "No," Eris said, the single word sharp as a blade. "Not until I speak to my attorney." "You have every right to counsel, Mr. Thorne. However, if you deny entry during a welfare check, the law requires us to escalate. We could be back with a court order in a matter of hours." It was a standoff. Lena, her arm wrapped protectively around Elian, stepped forward. Her voice, though steady, felt thin in the vastness of the foyer. "He's safe," she said, her eyes locking with the social workers. "I've been with him every day. There's no neglect here." Marcus Fielding's gaze shifted to her, analytical and detached. "And you are—" "Lena Petrova. I'm his full-time caregiver." Another note was jotted down on the clipboard. The sound of the pen scratching was unnaturally loud. Eris exhaled, a slow, controlled breath. He made 2 quick calls, one to his lawyer, another to a private security contact. When he turned back, his face was a mask of restrained fury. "You may enter," he said, his voice low, "but you do so under observation. Nothing is to be touched without my explicit consent." They stepped inside, and it felt like a violation. Their eyes scanned the foyer, the pristine living room, the well-stocked pantry, not as features of home, but as potential evidence. One agent asked to speak with Elian alone. Lena's hold on him tightened. "No," she said, her voice firm. "He doesn't speak with strangers. He has autism. I am his comfort, his voice. You can ask your questions, and I will translate for him." Marcus Fielding studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Noted. The assessment was a blur of quiet tension. They looked in cupboards, checked the temperature of the refrigerator, asked clipped questions. They found nothing, of course. The house was perfect. The child was cared for. But the damage wasn't what they found. It was in the simple act of their being there. The violation of this fragile sanctuary they had all been building. Just before they left, Marcus Fielding turned back. "Off the record, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "It's rare we see a child this well cared for. Whoever sent us, their motivations may not have been entirely pure." The door closed behind them. The silence they left in their wake was louder than any scream. Eris stood with his back to the room, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. "Someone," he said, his voice a low growl, "is trying to get to us." The storm had made landfall. It didn't take long for Eris's security advisor, a calm, silver-haired man named Lionel Hatch, to find the source. A terminated assistant, Sylvia Warner, whose access to their private calendar had never been fully revoked. And guess who she was now working for? Lark Technologies, Eris's most ruthless competitor. This wasn't just corporate. Eris seethed in a tense meeting later that day. This was personal. They knew how to hit me where it hurts. Through my son. Lena sat silently, her mind reeling. She was no longer just a caregiver. She was a pawn in a high-stakes game she never asked to play. And then the storm went public. The story broke online, then on the news. Billionaire under investigation for child neglect. And right beside those headlines was Lena's face, the mysterious live-in nanny. The rumors swirled like toxic smoke. She was a gold digger, a manipulator who had seduced a vulnerable father. They dug into her past, her humble background. Anonymous comments called her the maid who would be queen. Eris fought back fiercely. He held press conferences, his arm a protective barrier around Lena, his voice booming with defiance. Miss Petrova has been a godsend to my son. These allegations are malicious fiction. But the shadows were long, and the whispers were cruel. Lena tried to shield Elian, but he felt the tension. He became quieter, more withdrawn, his hard-won progress stalling. One night, as she scrolled through vile comments on her phone, a private message popped up from an unknown number. "I know what you are. He'll find out, too. You don't belong there." Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the phone. This wasn't just an attack on Eris anymore. It was a direct assault on her. Preston found her minutes later, her face pale, tears she refused to shed shining in her eyes. He took her phone, read the message, and his jaw turned to stone. "This ends now," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. The legal battle that followed was a cold, brutal war fought in wood-panel courtrooms. Lark Technologies filed a quiet injunction, claiming Eris's business practices were coercive. He countersued for defamation and emotional trauma. And then, Lena was called to testify. The courtroom felt like a cage. The air was cold. The lights were harsh. Across the room, Sylvia Warner sat with a smug smile, her engagement ring to Lark's glittering under the lights. The opposing attorney, a shark in a suit, tried to dismantle her. "And why would a housekeeper," he said, dripping with condescension, "insert herself into such a delicate situation?" Lena's throat was tight. She looked over at Eris, who gave her the slightest, most imperceptible nod. Then she looked at the judge, a wise-looking woman named Adeline Monroe. She took a deep breath and found her voice. "I grew up in a system that never noticed when I went hungry," she began, her words clear and steady, echoing in the silent room. "Or when my sister couldn't hear and no one bothered to learn how to talk to her." She turned her gaze to the attorney. "I promised myself that if I ever saw that look in another child's eyes, the look of being utterly forgotten, I wouldn't walk away. That little boy wasn't just frightened. He was lost. And I know what that feels like." The courtroom was utterly still. The posturing, the legal jargon, it all fell away in the face of her simple, devastating truth. Judge Monroe regarded her with a long, thoughtful look. "Thank you, Miss Petrova. You may step down." As Lena returned to her seat, her legs weak, she felt Eris's hand find hers under the table. His grip was firm, an anchor in the storm. "You were remarkable," he whispered. The ruling came a week later. The case was dismissed. Lark Technologies' allegations were thrown out, but it was the judge's final words that truly ended the storm. "I find it deeply disturbing," Judge Monroe said, her voice ringing with authority, "that a private corporation would manipulate child welfare systems for corporate gain. Miss Petrova's actions reflect the highest moral standard, one we would do well to emulate. This court recognizes her not just as a witness, but as a protector." Vindicated. The word should have felt sweet. But as they walked out of the courthouse, past the flashing cameras and shouting reporters, Lena just felt tired. The storm was over, but the landscape was forever changed. They had won, but they were all scarred, exhausted from the fight. That night, back in the quiet of the estate, Lena sat on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the darkness. Eris joined her, handing her a mug of tea. "I used to think I could fix everything with money," he said, his voice heavy. "Turns out, the things that matter most can't be bought. They have to be fought for." Lena sipped her tea, the warmth a small comfort. "Do you ever regret bringing me into all this?" she asked, the question she'd been too afraid to voice. He didn't answer with words. He simply reached over, took her hand, and placed it firmly over his heart. She could feel its strong, steady beat against her palm. "No," he said simply, "because you brought me back to mine." And in the quiet aftermath of the storm, under a sky full of stars, Lena finally let herself believe that some foundations, once shaken, don't crumble. They settle, and they become stronger than ever before. After a storm passes, the world doesn't just go back to how it was. The landscape is changed, cleansed, and away. The air feels newer. The colors seem brighter. That's what it felt like at the Valerius estate in the days and weeks that followed our court victory. The fight was over, but none of us were the same people we were before it began. I woke up each morning now with a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. The heavy silence that used to haunt these halls had been replaced by something lighter, the quiet hum of healing. When I walked into the kitchen each morning, it wasn't as an employee, but as someone who belonged. Elian would be there, often sitting at the island counter, and Eris would be attempting to make breakfast. The first time I saw the mighty Eris Thorne, CEO of a multimillion-dollar company, standing over a skillet of scrambling eggs with intense concentration, I had to hide my smile. "Morning," he'd say, his voice warm and genuine. No more guarded walls. No more pretending. Elian would turn, and when his eyes found mine, they'd light up in a way that made my heart feel too big for my chest. He didn't say anything, but he'd reach for my hand, something he'd started doing recently. His small fingers would wrap around mine, and he'd give this little squeeze that said everything words never could. One morning, as I was flipping pancakes, Eris came to stand beside me. "They're not going to let this go, are they?" he murmured, nodding toward the television where a news segment was still running about the housemaid who stood against a corporation. I followed his gaze, then looked down at Elian, who was carefully arranging blueberries on his pancake in a smiley face. "I don't need them to let it go," I said softly. "We have everything we need right here." But the world outside our bubble wasn't quite done with us yet. A letter arrived one afternoon, delivered by private courier. Cream-colored envelope, elegant handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. It was from Judge Monroe. She was offering to nominate me for the state's Child Welfare Advisory Board. She wrote that my experience, both personal and professional, could help shape policies to protect children like Elian, children like my brother Leo. I stood there in the foyer, the paper shaking in my hands. Eris found me like that, frozen in place. "What is it?" he asked, his voice full of concern. I handed him the letter, unable to speak. He read it slowly, then looked up at me, his eyes shining with something that looked like pride. "This is incredible, Lena," he whispered. "You could change things. For so many children." That's when I realized my purpose wasn't just here, within these walls. There were other children out there feeling as invisible as Elian had been, as Leo had been. The following week, Eris, Elian, and I visited a community center on the edge of the city, a place for children with disabilities. The moment we stepped inside, I felt like I'd come home. There was a young boy there, maybe 7 years old, struggling to form letters with his hands. Without thinking, I knelt beside him. "Like this," I whispered, gently guiding his fingers to sign home. When he got it right, his smile could have powered the entire city. I looked up and saw Eris watching from the doorway, Elian's hand in his. The expression on both their faces was identical, awe and something deeper, understanding. As we were leaving, the center director touched my arm. "If you ever want to volunteer," she said, "our doors are always open." I looked at Elian, who was quietly signing "Thank you" to the director. "I think I'd like that," I said. But the biggest miracle was still waiting for us back home. That evening, I was putting Elian to bed. The room was soft with twilight, the only light coming from the stars outside his window. I'd just finished reading him a story, and his eyes were getting heavy. I leaned down to kiss his forehead, the way I did every night. "Good night, my sweet boy," I whispered, turning to leave, and that's when I heard it, a small, sleepy voice. So quiet I almost missed it. "Stay." I froze, my breath caught in my chest. Slowly, so slowly, I turned back. Elian's eyes were open, looking right at me. He pointed to the space beside him on the bed. "Stay," he whispered again. Tears filled my eyes so fast I couldn't see. 2 years. For 2 years, this beautiful boy had been silent. And now he was asking me to stay. I sat beside him, taking his small hand in mine. "Always," I whispered back. "I'll always stay." He smiled a real, true smile and closed his eyes, his hand still holding mine. I don't know how long I sat there, watching him sleep, tears streaming down my face. But when I finally looked up, Eris was standing in the doorway. He'd heard everything. His own face was wet with tears. He didn't say a word, just opened his arms, and I went to him. We stood there in the hallway, holding each other, two broken people who had somehow found their way to wholeness in each other, and in a little boy who had finally found his voice. Later that night, Eris found me in the garden. The jasmine was blooming, filling the air with its sweet scent. He took both my hands in his. "Lena," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I know this isn't how these things are supposed to go, and I don't want to rush anything, but I need you to know I want you to stay, not as staff, as family." I looked at our joined hands, then up at his face, at the man who had learned to be a father again, who had fought for me when everyone was against us, who had let his walls down and let love in. "I'm not going anywhere," I told him, and I meant it. The following spring, there's a photo that sits on Eris's desk. It shows me and Elian under the big oak tree in the garden, both of us laughing, sunlight filtering through the leaves. Beneath it, engraved in small letters, it says, "Family is a place where the storm breaks." And you know, they're right. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who show up when you need them most. The ones who see the real you, even when you're hiding. The ones who teach you that the most powerful language isn't spoken with words, but with a heart that's willing to listen. Elian speaks more now. Not a lot, but enough. He calls me Lena and Eris, dada. And every time I hear his voice, I remember that night, the night he asked me to stay. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest love. Sometimes the person who's meant to clean the house ends up saving the family inside it. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find exactly where you belong by helping someone else find their way home. If you had told me a year ago that I would be standing where I am today, I would have never believed you. But life has a way of surprising us, of leading us exactly where we need to be, even when we can't see the path ahead. The morning sun streams through the kitchen windows of the Valerius estate, but it feels different now, warmer, like the house itself is smiling. I'm at the counter making pancakes, from scratch, the way Elian loves them. He sits on a stool beside me, carefully placing blueberries in a smiley face pattern on each one. His little tongue sticks out in concentration, and I can't help but smile. "Looking good, chef," I tell him. He looks up, and his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Thanks, Lena." He says my name now. Not every day, and not always when you expect it. But he says it. Each time feels like the first time, that same breathtaking wonder that still brings tears to my eyes. Eris comes in, his hair still damp from his shower, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt. This is my favorite version of him, the one without the armor, the one who's just Dad. "Something smells amazing," he says, wrapping an arm around my waist and kissing my temple. It's become our morning ritual, this easy, comfortable affection that feels as natural as breathing. He reaches past me to steal a blueberry, and Elian giggles, a real, bubbling over laugh that fills the entire kitchen. Eris freezes, his eyes meeting mine, and I see the same awe reflected in them that I feel in my heart. We're collecting these moments now, storing them up like treasures. Every giggle, every word, every quiet moment of connection. After breakfast, we drive to the community center, where I volunteer now. It's become part of our weekly routine. Elian holds my hand as we walk through familiar blue doors, his small fingers trustingly tucked in mine. The children here know us now. A little girl named Chloe runs up immediately, signing hello with enthusiastic, slightly messy hands. Elian signs back, his movements careful and precise. He started helping me with the younger children, showing them the signs he knows, sitting patiently when they struggle. He understands their frustration in a way only someone who's been there can. I watch him sometimes during these sessions. This little boy who once couldn't bear to be touched, now gently guiding another child's hands. The transformation isn't just in his ability to speak. It's in the way he moves through the world now, like he belongs in it. Eris usually watches from the doorway, his expression soft. Sometimes he joins in, his large, capable hands looking almost comical as he tries to mimic the delicate signs. But he keeps trying. He's always trying. On the drive home, Elian falls asleep in his car seat, exhausted from his morning of helping. Eris reaches across the console and takes my hand. "You're changing lives, you know," he says quietly. Not just his, all of them. I look at our joined hands, then back at his face. "We're changing lives," I correct him gently, because that's the truth of it. We've all been transformed by this love we've built together. That evening, after Elian is tucked in bed, after stories and songs and goodnight kisses, Eris leads me out to the garden. The jasmine is in full bloom now, its sweet scent wrapping around us like a blanket. Fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, and somewhere in the distance, wind chimes sing their gentle song. He doesn't say anything at first, just holds both my hands and looks at me, really looks at me, like he's seeing me for the first time and memorizing every detail. "I was thinking," he says finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "about making this official, about us being a family in every way that matters." My breath catches. "What are you saying?" He smiles, that slow, beautiful smile that still makes my heart skip a beat. "I'm saying I want to adopt Elian. I want to give him my name, legally, and I want you to be his mother in every sense of the word." Tears fill my eyes so quickly I can't see. "Eris, and I want to marry you," he continues, his voice steady and sure. "Not because we have to, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because you taught me how to love again, how to be a father, how to live." He doesn't get down on one knee. There's no ring box. There's just us standing in our garden, with the stars beginning to blink awake above us, and the truth hanging between us, beautiful and real. "Yes," I whisper, the word tasting like joy, like hope, like coming home. "To all of it, yes." He pulls me into his arms then, and I feel his heart beating against mine, steady and strong and sure. When he kisses me, it feels like a promise, like a new beginning. The wedding is small, just us, a few close friends, Mrs. Green dabbing at her eyes throughout the entire ceremony. Elian stands between us, holding both our hands, beaming. When the officiant pronounces us husband and wife, Elian doesn't just smile, he laughs. That same bubbling over laugh that still feels like a miracle every time we hear it. "Now we're really a family," he says, his voice clear and happy. Eris and I look at each other over his head, and I see my own wonder reflected in his eyes. Yes, now we're really a family. Later that night, after the guests have left and Elian is sleeping peacefully, I stand in the doorway of his room, watching him. His chest rises and falls in a soft rhythm of sleep, one hand curled around the stuffed bear I mended for him months ago. Eris comes to stand behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders. "He looks so peaceful," he murmurs into my ear. I lean back against him, feeling the solid, steady strength of him. "He is peaceful," I say. "He's home." "And you?" he asks, turning me to face him. "Are you home?" I look around the room, at the colored block stacked neatly in the corner, the drawings taped to the wall, the small, sleeping boy who taught me how to love without limits. Then I look at the man standing before me, the man who learned to listen with his heart. "Yes," I say, and the word feels like a prayer, like a promise, like the beginning of everything. "I'm home." Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most ordinary places. Sometimes family isn't about where you come from, but who you choose to walk with. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find that the person you were meant to be was waiting for you all along, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the language of understanding, in the beautiful, messy, wonderful journey of building a home together.